Hi, we're from the University of Melbourne, so we're asking the audience to assume the identity of Pfizer's executive board, so the pharmaceutical company, and we're an external consulting agency. Thank you very much for inviting us back to discuss the ethical implications of Pfizer's overutilisation of share repurchasing. My name is Hugh Sterling, and I am joined by my colleagues Manning Clifford and Adeline Gabriel.
To remind you of the case which we presented to you earlier, we believe that Pfizer's excessive use of share repurchases is ethically flawed. We see that by purchasing their own shares on the stock market, this is coming at the expense of long-term profit for Pfizer and payable dividends for their shareholders, as they're purchasing their own shares in order to artificially inflate their share price without actually increasing their market capitalisation value. We think the driving cause of this is misaligned CEO incentive structure, the nuances of which we'll allude on further in today's presentation. Furthermore, by prioritising share repurchases, we're seeing that this is coming at the expense of productive investment into other areas such as research and development, innovation, and extension into other areas of market expansion. We think that our plan addresses this issue by changing the corporate incentive structure at Pfizer and redirecting expenditure towards more productive investments. At Phoenix Consulting, our consulting firm, from a secular ethical standpoint, we believe that a combined consequentialist and principle-based approach to business ethics is most conducive to the best outcomes for Pfizer. We've identified 3 primary ethical obligations which Pfizer has to uphold that are paramount to its operations. Firstly, Pfizer has an obligation to shareholders as the owners of the company. Secondly, it has an obligation to customers who rely on its pharmaceutical products for life-saving medication. Thirdly, Pfizer has an obligation to global healthcare outcomes to continue to develop and prioritise the development of pharmaceutical goods for diseases that until now have not been treated.
The first ethical concern which we need to look into is whether or not Pfizer is currently meeting its obligation to shareholders through its use of share repurchases by purchasing their own shares on the open market. There's an inherent obligation which Pfizer as a company has to its shareholders, because ultimately they are the owners of the business. When you purchase a share within our company, you necessarily are purchasing a portion of that company. And collectively, the shareholder body are the owners of Pfizer. And therefore, it is essential that as the board of directors, you are looking out for the interests of these shareholders, but not only a certain portion of shareholders, the entirety of the shareholder body, both now and into the future. This is where the ethical dilemma regarding shareholders emerges when Pfizer utilises its capital to purchase its own shares on the open market and temporarily drive up the share price comes. Because Pfizer needs to consider whether or not it is looking out for the interests of short-term speculative shareholders who are selling these shares at the higher price, or genuinely concerned about the long-term interests of committed investors into the company. This is a trade-off that all companies need to make when looking at their balances both now and into the future. Companies don't give all of their profits to their current shareholders. Instead, they make an informed decision as to what is best for the future profitability of the company, as well as what is best for the long-term interests of shareholders. In this instance, we believe that Pfizer are currently compromising this trade-off by having an overemphasis on delivering short-term returns to shareholders. Speculative investors who are in it for the short run are able to make significant sums of money as Pfizer's share price is temporarily artificially inflated due to share repurchase programs. This is coming at the expense of long-term investors in 2 forms. Firstly, long-term investors aren't able to benefit from other returns of capital through forms such as dividends which are being sacrificed in order to fund these repurchasing programs. That means that Pfizer is not living up to its ethical obligations to a significant portion of its shareholder group. But secondly, long-term investors now and into the future are missing out from the long-term investment benefits which would come from investing in productive research and development opportunities. In the sense that current shareholders are benefiting from past investments, we think that it's important to recognise that future investors need to benefit from our current investment strategies. Our plan addresses this by rethinking the way in which Pfizer's executive approaches share repurchases and more broadly a relationship with shareholders. We believe that share repurchases should only be used when dividends are an unviable option of delivering money to shareholders. Dividends in this instance are significantly more preferable because they deliver returns to all shareholders, including short-term shareholders and long-term shareholders, whereas share repurchases are only prioritising those investors who can sell their shares in the short run. We also think that share repurchases and more broadly returning money to shareholders should not come at the expense of profitable investment opportunities. As we will outline, this links up to further ethical obligations, but we believe now is a great opportunity to reform this practice and ensure that Pfizer is living up to its obligations to all of its shareholders, not just the select few. This also raises a question more broadly as to the purpose of Pfizer as a company. We believe that at the moment, Pfizer is having too much of a focus on ensuring that they are simply maximizing shareholder value, rather than having a broader consideration of its place within a society. As a company within a market-based society, Pfizer has an obligation not just to its shareholders, but also to deliver the products and services which it has been tasked with providing. If Pfizer continues to focus on simply providing short-term goals for its shareholders, that neglects its overall purpose. And we think that in the long run, both the obligation to shareholders as well as delivering long-term products which are life-changing are complementary. And we think now is the time to reflect on this and ensure that this process is occurring.
The second key ethical issue is the manner in which Pfizer's executives are being incentivized. Currently, Pfizer's executive compensation incentives are very much linked to the value of the share. Further to this, most of Pfizer's executives are primarily being compensated through company shares rather than in cash. We believe that this creates a misaligned incentive in which Pfizer's executives may prioritise or perhaps manipulate the value of the share through practices such as share purchasing. Firstly, let us assess the underlying purpose of compensation incentives. They're intended to attract, keep and motivate executives to perform, while also encouraging an eye to future profitability and business growth. Although Pfizer's current program motivates executives to deliver financial returns to shareholders, we feel that this focus on the short term really inhibits the company's capacity to deliver long-term medical outcomes to consumers. So thus ultimately, it is the consumer who is really being hurt by these skewed incentives. Every dollar that is directed away from research and development and towards share purchasing means that there are fewer products making it to market and accordingly fewer life-saving treatments going to consumers. The misaligned incentives behind this focus on the short term really call into question the ethicality of the current executive incentive scheme. The fact that these incentives conflict with the consequentialist goals set by Pfizer itself really calls into not only the ethicality of Pfizer, but really its reputation as a big pharmaceutical company. In order to return to its virtuous foundations, Pfizer must rethink its approach to executive compensation incentives by implementing our plan of A, restructuring market compensation incentives, and B, transitioning to a more cash and reward-based compensation scheme.
The third and final ethical musing that we'd like to direct your attention to is that of the trade-off between share repurchases and our commitment to public health and individual health outcomes. We think that the crux of this is actually a trade-off between investment in share repurchases and investment in patient welfare. By foregoing investment in areas such as research and development, innovation, and expansion of market activities into emerging economies, we see that Pfizer is hindering its product pipeline, and as a consequence of this, it is compromising its ethical obligation to individual patient health outcomes and global health outcomes. By directing expenditure away from research and development, we see that millions of patients are missing out on potentially life-saving pharmaceuticals. Furthermore, by Pfizer's seeming reluctance to invest in innovation, current consumers are missing out as they're expending unnecessary amounts on pharmaceuticals which could be addressed by innovation in the field of pharmaceuticals. Basically, for every dollar we spend on share repurchases, but that should have been spent on productive investment, there is a potential that life-changing breakthroughs are being sacrificed in this process. And it's these breakthroughs which have an impact on real patients' health, and not only their health, but that of their family and friends who care about them. We also see that Pfizer's failure to meet its commitment to producing pharmaceutical goods and prioritise this commitment over that of share repurchases is not just coming at the expense of its profit, and it's not just coming at the expense of its ethical integrity and its commitment to shareholders and to individuals and to global health outcomes. It's coming at the expense of actual patients' lives. And we think that our plan addresses this by realigning Pfizer's incentive priorities, realigning its investment priorities, and redirecting capital towards more productive investment options for Pfizer's future.
To this end, we believe that Pfizer has the potential to increase its standing regarding ethical investments. If our plan was to be implemented, we believe that Pfizer could not only cause its transition from a fairly ethically dubious practice in terms of misaligned incentives. We believe that if they change this practice, they'd be able to be a leader in the pharmaceutical industry. Thank you.
Thank you.